Greetings and welcome to New Money. I'm Bryan and tonight our topic deals with healthcare. I'd like to share a story with our viewers, a story that was told to me that has become very much part of my mantra. Tony O'Reilly, who headed up the British newspapers for many years, and who's probably better known to most South Africans when he represented the British Lions in South Africa many years ago. He came out of his office one night and he didn't have a newspaper, so he walked across the road and he went to a newspaper vendor and said, "Please give me a newspaper." And the newspaper vendor gave him a pound, and the vendor walked off. And he said, "Hey, where are you going? Where's my change?" He says, "No change, sir." He says, "Hang on, firstly, do you know who I am?" And the newspaper vendor said, "Yes, you're the big boss of all the newspapers." He said, "Yes. And look here, in the newspaper, it says, I gave you a pound, it says 60p. And the newspaper vendor said, "Sir, don't believe everything you read in newspapers." So I always say this to everyone, when you're seeing the headlines, be very careful. But there was an article in Sunday Times financial section yesterday, an article headed, "ANC likely to push for NHI in its present form." And joining me this evening is Dr. Ron Whelan, Chief Executive Officer of Discovery Health. Ron, good to have you on the show.
Great to be here. Thank you, Bryan.
Well, Ron, we're going to pick up on a lot of the points that you had at your annual general meeting recently, but I do want to ask you, this type of headline, I mean, it's very misleading. I had two people who contacted me in the last few weeks with the following stories. The first person phoned me and said, "Now that NHI's there, which hospital can he go to?" And the second person phoned and said, "I'm contributing to a medical aid. I want to get my employer to stop, give me, instead of contributing to the medical aid, give me the funds as additional salary." So, I mean, these type of headlines are very misleading. Where are we? What is the current position with NHI?
I think the first thing to say, Bryan, is do not give up your medical aid. The Minister of Health has said so as well. It's critical. NHI is going to take a long time to implement, with many challenges that lie ahead in the implementation of NHI. It's critical that people who are on medical scheme coverage do not give up their medical scheme coverage. You will not be able to gain access to private hospitals and private healthcare facilities if you don't have your adequate medical scheme cover, and you'll then need to pay out of pocket, and we all know the costs of healthcare. So please be cautious of changing your medical scheme cover or giving up your medical aid.
Yeah, Ron, just one thing. Giving up your medical aid is one thing, but perhaps changing the plan you're on to suit your needs. And I think so many people don't really understand which plan they should be on. It's nice to be, I'm a healthy person, it's nice to be on a lower scheme plan, and I'm an unhealthy person on a higher scheme plan. I think what is critical is to assess what plan you're on, and also assess long term because of future. I mean, if they're predicting inflation, medical aid at 8 or 9% a year, that means that within 8-9 years your medical aid is going to double, and in another doubling year it's going to be up fourfold. So people need to get onto the right medical program and plan.
Yeah, it's exactly right, Bryan. I think that's why it's important to speak to your financial advisor around your medical scheme coverage. There are a range of different plan options available. I like to think about it as a plan for every pocket across the Discovery Health medical scheme. And alongside a plan for every pocket, there are plans for people who can afford greater coverage, and there are plans for people who can afford a narrower set of benefits. So it's important to weigh up the different plan options in accordance with your ability to afford that cover, alongside the benefits that are available across those plans. I think you're right to mention that medical scheme cover is important. Healthcare in itself is expensive. It's expensive to deliver healthcare. There is ongoing advances in technology. People are living longer, and with people living longer, healthcare consumption goes up, and that's a big part of why we see medical schemes and healthcare cover growing at greater than CPI. Typically, we see healthcare cover growing at somewhere about 3 to 4% above CPI on an annual basis, and it's a result of those demand side factors in terms of population aging, as well as supply side factors in terms of technological advancement.
Now, that's why I said if you're talking 4% above and you're talking about inflation, let's be kind, 4.5% inflation, you're talking about within 9 years a medical aid will double. Yeah. Just looking at the Alexander Forbes Schemes Sustainability Index, Discovery Medical Aid was named as the most suitable open scheme in the industry. So let me ask you this, what metrics contributed to the scheme's sustainability?
Well, I think firstly we're very proud of Discovery Health Medical Scheme coming out top in that particular survey by Alexander Forbes. The main metrics in that survey are related to the size of the medical scheme, and Discovery Health Medical Scheme is the biggest open medical scheme in the open medical scheme market at the moment, at 2.7 million members. The second thing is...
I don't want to stop. 2.7 out of how many members would you say are contributing to medical aids?
Well, there's 2.7...
in Discovery?
Yeah, 2.7 million lives on the Discovery Health Medical Scheme.
And total, what estimated?
So there's 9 million, 9 million medical scheme members in the overall medical scheme market. The medical scheme market is obviously divided between restricted medical schemes, those are typically employer-based medical schemes, and open medical schemes like the Discovery Health Medical Scheme, where anyone can join those particular medical schemes.
Sorry to throw you off your train. I mean, we were talking about sustainability.
Yeah, so the sustainability metrics in the Alex Forbes survey include the following. The first one is the size of the medical scheme. So Discovery Health Medical Scheme is the biggest open medical scheme in South Africa, 2.7 million lives. The second metric is related to growth and ongoing growth of the medical scheme. And it's important for medical schemes to continue to grow because they bring in younger, healthy lives, which improves the risk profile of the scheme. The third metric is related to the overall risk profile of the medical scheme, and that relates to the proportion of members living with chronic disease, the age, the average age across the medical scheme, the proportion of pensioners across the medical scheme. So that's the risk profile of the medical scheme. And then the fourth and probably the most important metric is the solvency levels, so the financial viability of the medical scheme. And in South Africa, we have a regulated solvency of 25% of annual contributions need to be held in reserves. The Discovery Health Medical Scheme currently has over 30% of annual contributions held in reserve. So there's a very high solvency threshold, which protects the long-term financial sustainability of the Discovery Health Medical Scheme.
Ron, you mentioned growing, and there are a lot of smaller medical aids who are not growing. And the second point you mentioned is you want some sort of cross-subsidisation. But the younger members, and we'll talk about that in a moment, so I've got an email, so let's just leave that for a moment. But the younger members are maybe not buying the same sort of cover and the higher level of cover. So you've got the older members getting older who are part of the more comprehensive cover. How do you deal with that actuarially?
Well, I think the important thing to know about medical schemes in South Africa is we operate on an open enrollment system. Number one, that's where everyone is allowed to join a medical scheme across the system. We also run on a community-rated model. And what community-rated means is across the different plan types, everyone pays the same contribution, regardless of how sick you are, regardless of your age, across a medical scheme. So community enrollment is the principle. And for that reason, as you rightly mentioned, Bryan, we work on a cross-subsidisation mechanism where younger, perhaps more healthy lives cross-subsidise people who are of older composition and perhaps less healthy. So that cross-subsidisation plays into effect. So it's important that we get the balance right across medical schemes and that we continue to drive uptake across younger, healthier lives. Now this works well. As you're aging, you're paying effectively a slightly lower premium than what you would in a risk-rated environment. And if you're younger, when you're in your productive years and able to afford cover, you're paying slightly higher than what you would in a risk-rated world. It is important to point out, Bryan, regardless of how old you are, how young you are, there are medical emergencies and trauma events that happen. And I see these on a day-to-day basis. You can never predict when you're going to be in a car accident. You can never predict when when you're diagnosed with a terminal condition, perhaps your cancer and other serious conditions. So that risk cover is equally important to younger generations and older generations. And I think our younger generations need to recognize that they are not infallible and are prone to similar medical and surgical risks throughout their lives. So we certainly encourage uptake in younger generations. And then, of course, as when you're younger, you tend to be looking to grow a family, and pregnancy comes with particular risks. Kids come with different risks. So medical scheme cover is certainly important across the different age categories.
Ron, but one thing that I suggested some discussion on, what happens about a smaller scheme that's not growing and their members are aging? Because, they're not attracting younger members, and therefore, and the older members are staying on the scheme.
I mean, this is certainly a problem, and particularly across...
Is that an industry concern or each individual company's own concern, medical aids?
It's absolutely an industry concern. So it's an industry concern in that the medical scheme industry is now 9 million lives across the industry. It's largely flat growth. So what we're seeing across the industry is churn. And that is partly driven by some of the affordability pressures across the industry, and we recognize that as healthcare being expensive. It's partly driven by some of the regulatory restrictions we have around medical schemes, community rating, open enrollment, prescribed minimum benefits. Bryan, it's important that you understand prescribed minimum benefits effectively set a floor on the cost of medical scheme cover. So prescribed minimum benefits on their own cost a medical scheme somewhere between 1,300 and 1,400 rand per life per month. That's the starting point just to cover prescribed minimum benefits. We have a very rich set of prescribed minimum benefits that medical schemes provide, which is great for members across the spectrum, but certainly raises the threshold on medical scheme costs.
So I've got a question here that says, when is a PMB not a B? Because lately I've discovered that although I think it falls under PMB, it's not. So when is a PMB not a PMB?
It's such an important question, Bryan. I get this question a lot.
I'm sure you do.
There are two lenses to look at your PMB legislation. The first one is which diseases are classified as PMBs. And there are a range of diseases that are and conditions that are classified as PMBs.
Ron, can we just put a pin in that? We're going to come back to that. We're going to take a break. When we get back, Ron's explaining when is a PMB not a PMB. He's going to explain for so many of you viewers who always think that everything falls under PMBs. And also, I'll ask him also a little bit about when is a chronic not a chronic. Stay tuned, we'll be back shortly.